Barbara Palvin, walking through the glittering yet harsh streets of New York on that cold winter night, felt a strange sense of unease wash over her. The sidewalks were covered in snow, and the yellow light from the street lamps flickered in the chill wind. The headlights of cars rushing by cast brief shadows on the faces of pedestrians. Although the weight of the day hung heavily on her shoulders, something caught her attention. At the corner of an old building, a thin child wrapped in a light coat sat huddled. His head hung low, knees drawn to his chest, and he was shivering slightly. People passing by glanced at him briefly before continuing on their way. A few crumpled newspaper pieces and a worn-out backpack lay next to him. Barbara took a few more steps but then stopped. A voice inside her urged her to turn back. As she stepped back, the child's cold blue eyes met hers. In those eyes, there were traces of loneliness, hopelessness, and perhaps a weariness learned far too early in life. Barbara crouched down and gently approached him, speaking softly. The child lifted his head but quickly averted his gaze. Barbara offered him the coffee she had been carrying. The child hesitated at first, then slowly took the cup. As the warmth of the drink touched his hands, a faint relief appeared on his face. At that moment, Barbara realized just how young he was. He was probably around 11 or 12, but his tired face carried the marks of someone who had lived far longer, enduring the hardships of the streets. The child held the coffee with both hands, sipping it slowly. Barbara, now sure that he wouldn't run off, sat down beside him. They stayed silent for a while. The sounds of footsteps from passers-by, a distant car horn, and the rustling of the wind filled the stillness between them. Barbara knew she had to gain the child's trust. Without pressuring him, she began to speak gently. His name was Liam. He didn't talk about his family and gave brief answers to questions about his past, but Barbara's eyes told her his story. That night, Barbara couldn't bear to leave him on the street. She took him to a hotel, providing him with a warm meal and a clean bed. Liam was initially anxious, silent, but when he finally felt the warmth of a safe environment, a light sparkled in his eyes. At that moment, Barbara knew she had to do more for him. The next day, Liam was still there. He hadn't run away. That was a sign for Barbara. She had earned his trust, but it was only the beginning. She realized Liam wasn't ready to talk about his past, so she gave him time. She hosted him at the hotel for a while, gradually helping him regain his trust in the world through small gestures. Over time, he began to open up. Barbara took him to bookstores, spent hours in the library with him. When she noticed his interest in reading, she bought him a few books. He tried to refuse them at first, but eventually he accepted, albeit reluctantly. As days passed, Liam began to hold an important place in Barbara's life. But she knew this was only a temporary solution. The child needed a permanent home. So she contacted the local social services. Liam initially rejected the idea. He had been lost in the system before, encountering only procedures, not love. But Barbara was determined to show him that this time would be different. Social services began looking for a suitable family for Liam. During this process, Barbara did everything she could to ensure Liam didn't feel alone. Liam felt safe with Barbara, but he also knew he couldn't stay with her forever. So he started trying to get used to the idea of a new family. After a while, social services found a loving couple. They had previously adopted children and had provided them with a warm home. Liam was cautious at first. He wasn't ready to trust them. But Barbara was by his side and had promised to support him through the process. Over time, Liam began to adjust to his new family. He was quiet at first, speaking little, but gradually, step by step, he started to open up. His new family didn't push him. They waited patiently. And one day, Liam began to see them as his real family. For Barbara, this journey was much more than just helping Liam. It changed her life. She decided to establish a foundation for homeless children, understanding that they needed not only a place to stay, but also love and security. A few weeks later, Lily was feeling much better. The time spent with Barbara had shown her that she wasn't alone. For the first time, she felt truly safe. One evening, Barbara took her to an event hosted by the foundation. Lily was reluctant at first. She always avoided crowds. But with Barbara's insistence, she agreed. As they entered the hall, Lily found herself surrounded by other children who had gone through similar struggles. As she began talking to them, she realized that there were others who understood her pain and shared the same emotions. That night, Lily found the courage to speak about her future. She quietly turned to Barbara and asked in a soft voice, "What happens now?" Barbara smiled warmly at her. "We'll figure it out together." For the first time, Lily believed that things were going to get better. What had begun on a cold winter night had now turned into a hopeful new beginning. And it all started with a cup of hot coffee. Lily had been a lost child, struggling to survive on the streets a few years ago. Back then, she was searching for a glimmer of hope, and it was thanks to Barbara that she found the turning point in her life. Now, walking through the noisy streets of New York, her steps carried a different weight. It was the confidence of a lost child, finally finding her identity. Over time, Lily's life had evolved into something far different from that cold winter night. She was no longer alone. She had come out of the shadows of her past and was beginning to understand herself. The trust Barbara had offered her, what had once made her cold and distant, had now given her the courage to smile, to interact with people around her. Barbara had helped rebuild Lily, not just physically, but emotionally. Many nights they'd take long walks together, diving into deep conversations about life. Lily had started to feel safe, but there was still something missing within her. It wasn't easy to erase every trace of her past. Sometimes she would remember the dark moments she had once lived through. One day, while leaving the foundation with Barbara, thoughts were racing through Lily's mind. Barbara had always approached her with patience and understanding, but no one had been able to fill the deep emptiness inside her. At some point, Lily realized that an internal change was necessary. It might be about letting go of her past and ultimately learning to forgive herself. One morning, Barbara made a suggestion. "I want to offer you a chance to start fresh," she said, trying to gauge Lily's feelings. "I've found a school for you to work on an art project. It's a place where you can discover your talents." Lily hesitated at first. "Art?" she asked, "but I'm not." Barbara, without cutting her off, responded, "There's something inside you, Lily. I can show you what it is. Your past doesn't define you. You are who you are now. What your future will be is entirely in your hands." Lily took a deep breath. Once there had been nothing but darkness in her past, but now perhaps a light was starting to shine. One morning, she decided to go to the school that Barbara had suggested. That day, for the first time, she truly accepted the idea of leaving her past behind. At the school, Lily began expressing herself as an artist. Over time, the depth and emotion in her paintings allowed her to see herself in a new light. Slowly, art became her language, giving her a way to open up her inner world. She had plans for the future. To see herself as an artist was adding new meaning to her life. One day, she participated in an exhibition at the school. There were strangers in the audience, but the understanding and respect she saw in their eyes meant more to her than anything else. In that moment, she realized she wasn't just a young girl rediscovering herself. She was also a woman who had found her own path. As the days went by, her bond with Barbara grew stronger. Barbara had not only given her a home, but also a new perspective on the world. Although the pains of her past still surfaced occasionally, Lily no longer dwelled on them. Every new day, she moved one step further. One evening, while working in the foundation's office, Lily suddenly stopped and looked out the window. "Barbara," she said, "sometimes when I feel like I've become the old me again, I think I've disappeared. But then I remember that there's always another way." Barbara turned and smiled at her. "Losing yourself might be necessary to find something again. Someone like you could never truly be lost." In that moment, Lily realized something. Losing herself had been a journey, a discovery. She had found her identity, and now, with every step, she was becoming stronger. With every project related to art, she was letting go of all her vulnerabilities and emotional burdens. Even in the shadow of her past, there was a light, one that, in that moment, shone brighter than everything else.